At some point, usually in the quiet after a loss or the shock of an inexplicable experience, most of us are ambushed by the same questions. Who am I really? What is this place? Why would any sane intelligence choose to be here? Science gives us elegant answers about how things move, react, and evolve. Spiritual traditions give us profound insights about meaning, love, and purpose. But for many of us, especially those raised inside strong religious systems, these answers don't fit together. We're left with a patchwork of beliefs, competing theories, and a nagging sense that something larger is going on. This book is an attempt to describe that larger something in a way that honors both the rigor of science and the depth of genuine spiritual experience. It stands on the shoulders of many streams. The Monroe Institute's Explorer Sessions, where ordinary people reported extraordinary journeys into other levels of consciousness. Channeled material like the Gandhi Cluster and Ra, offering a consistent picture of a multi-layered reality and a universe that is fundamentally mental. Near-death and between-lives research that refuses to go away, no matter how hard materialism tries to ignore it. Emerging frameworks like simulator theory that treat consciousness as primary and the physical world as a real, law-governed training ground for that consciousness. Through all of these runs, a common thread. We are not accidents, we are not trapped, we are not at the mercy of a distant, arbitrary God. We are fractal expressions of the same living essence that birthed galaxies. We are participating in a vast, layered reality where belief and attention help render the worlds we move through. And we are here, not as punishment, not as test subjects, but as active participants in our own unfolding. If you have felt torn between the God of your childhood and the wider cosmos you now intuit, if you've outgrown fear-based religion but still feel Christ's presence as something real and luminous, if you've tasted edges of the unseen through dreams, synchronicity, or direct experience, this book is for you. It won't ask you to trade one dogma for another. Instead, it offers a framework you can stand inside while you continue your own exploration. You don't have to believe any of it. You only have to notice what happens in you as you consider it. Chapter 1. A Fractile of Source. Before we talk about bodies, beliefs, tragedies, or churches, we need to start where everything else starts. Not with matter, not with mind, with the field that precedes both. The Explorer Sessions speak of a God force, an uncreated force, a living essence that was before any universe cooled or any star burned. At some point, words fail here. That essence did something like what we call creating. It did not manufacture a universe out of nothing. It gave of itself. Love, in that language, is not just affection. It is the original movement, the desire of the essence to share, to overflow, to experience itself in form. If you're comfortable with mathematical metaphors, imagine this essence as a fractal generator. The whole pattern is contained in the rule. Every expression of the rule, at every scale, reveals the same underlying geometry in a different way. At the largest scales, this rule expresses as fields of possibility that quantum physics glimpses as probability distributions, the stabilization of those probabilities into recognizable environments, stars, planets, ecosystems, worlds like ours, whose conditions are conducive to life and consciousness. At more focused scales, it expresses as what we call souls, centers of awareness that are not separate from the essence that generated them, but are distinct in vantage point and experience. What mystics call the image of God. What the Explorer sources simply call the highest self, or Christ self. The aspect of that essence most fully awake to itself in each being. This is our starting claim. You are not a separate manufactured item in a universe of strangers. You are a localized expression of the same consciousness that underlies and permeates everything. This part of you was not created by your parents, your culture, or your religion, does not begin at the moment of conception or end at the moment of death, exists before, during, and after any particular incarnation, and has participated in many. It is not something you have to acquire. It is what you are, most deeply, already. The Explorer material goes further. It says that this highest pattern, what they call Christ consciousness, is not unique to one historical figure. It exists in every soul because the Christ consciousness is that true consciousness, that highest level of consciousness in all matter. Jesus, in this view, is a human in whom that pattern was unusually free and unobstructed. But the pattern itself is universal. So when we say you are a fractal of Source, we are not flattering you. We are making a descriptive statement. The same rule that generated galaxies operates in you. The same love movement that initiated creation pulses at the core of your being. The same timeless knowing that Explorer sources attribute to the God force is available in you as the level of knowing, even while you live inside time.
Most of our trouble begins when we forget this, and then build our identities on what can change or be taken away.
In the next chapter, we'll look at why forgetting happens, why we come into dense worlds at all, and what the simulator model can teach us about the strange combination of beauty and brutality we find here. Chapter 2. The Simulator and the Shell. If our deepest identity is a fractal of Source, why would we ever leave that state of timeless unity and step into a world where things hurt, die, and break? The short answer is, because there are things we can only learn by doing so. The longer answer asks us to look at this world, not as a mistake or a prison, but as a simulator, a real, law-governed, high-intensity environment designed to give consciousness experiences it cannot have in purely non-physical states. A real world, not a fake one. When people hear simulator, they often jump to simulation, as in none of this is real. That is not what this model proposes. The simulator theory insists on three things at once. The universe is fundamentally quantum and informational. Physical environments like Earth are stabilized quantum regimes, real, reliable, deeply rendered worlds where cause and effect work. Consciousness is primary and interfaces with biology. It is not produced by it. Explorer-style sources agree on the essentials. They speak of a God force that overflows into worlds and beings. Earth as a living planet with its own consciousness and energy patterns. Souls stepping into bodies to work at the intersection of physical and non-physical levels. So we're not in a video game on someone else's hard drive. We're in a real environment nested inside a larger reality, like a richly furnished room inside a much larger house. The room matters. What happens here has real consequences and leaves real imprints on our minds, on other beings, and on the wider field. That is what makes it valuable. The fusion, higher self plus human avatar. At some point in Earth's history, biological evolution produced organisms complex enough to host a different kind of guest. Brains, nervous systems, and sensory apparatus reached a threshold where they could serve as a high-bandwidth interface for non-physical consciousness. When that happened, a new kind of entity emerged. Human self, the Earth-originating organism with its instincts, genetics, and survival intelligence. Higher self, an encapsulated non-physical consciousness, a soul, linking into that organism for the duration of a life. The Explorer material pictures this as an energy being connected by light to a human platform, taking dictation from a higher aspect of itself. The simulator paper describes it as consciousness using the body the same way a pilot uses a flight simulator. In both images, two things are true. The body has autonomy. It can seek food, shelter, mates. It carries ancestral trauma and cultural conditioning. The higher self has a longer memory and a broader agenda. It cares less about comfort and more about growth, integration, and love. Modern human life is this fusion in action. You are both, a creature of Earth, embedded in history and biology, and a being from elsewhere, using that creature as a vehicle for very specific kinds of experience. Immersion and forgetting. There is a problem, though. For the simulator to work as intended, you can't walk around every day with full awareness of your larger identity and history. If you remembered everything too clearly, the stakes would feel low and the learning shallow. So immersion requires forgetting. Upon entry, the higher self's broader context is veiled. Past lives, between lives choices, and other dimensions recede into the background. The human narrative, birth family, culture, religion, personality, moves to the foreground. Over time, this can harden into exclusive identification with the biological self. We come to believe we are nothing but the story, body plus biography plus belief system. Around this identification, we build protections, emotional armor to avoid hurt, psychological defenses to avoid shame or failure, doctrinal certainties to avoid existential fear. Explorer sources call this a time capsule, a shell of fear, self-protection, and resistance to inner knowing that can lock a soul into one position for an entire life. The capsule serves a purpose. It gets us through childhood and shocks. But it has a cost. It can keep us cycling through the same patterns of relationship and suffering, block us from sensing guidance, meaning, and deeper layers of ourselves, make us ripe for capture by external egregores that promise safety in exchange for our sovereignty. In a sense, every incarnate life is a negotiation between immersion and remembrance, tragedy as stress test. If the shell never cracked, we might spend lifetimes sleepwalking. This is where tragedy, from this perspective, fits in. The Gandhi cluster teaching is blunt about it. Many souls desire not to know, and will avoid self-confrontation as long as possible. To break that impasse, certain experiences have to be set up that the personality would never choose. Losses, deaths, broken timelines. These events are not punishments from a wrathful God. They are pressure events that make it harder to maintain the illusion that the shell is all there is. When a beloved dies at 31, or a career collapses, or a diagnosis arrives, the capsule is stressed. Some souls respond by doubling down on fear, anger, or numbness. Others find, to their own surprise, that something deeper opens. A sudden clarity about what matters. A softening of judgment. An awareness of presence, love, or meaning that was not accessible before. From the simulator angle, tragedy is not God's will, in the sense of micromanaged suffering. It is a native feature of a world where bodies break and choices clash, and a faithfully exploited opportunity for the higher self to nudge the human self toward breakthrough. If you imagine the higher self as an instructor and Earth as a training rig, tragedy is not the instructor flipping switches to hurt you. It is what happens when the rig is pushed to its limits. The instructor's role is to make sure the pain is not wasted. Awakening, breaking the shell from the inside. Awakening in this context is not an escape from the simulator. It is a shift in how you are in it. The simulator paper describes it as an expansion of context, a restoration of awareness of the larger system while remaining fully engaged in physical life. Explorer teachings describe it as breaking through the conscious time-bound level into that timelessness of knowing, while on the earth plane. Practically, awakening looks like recognizing that you are more than your story, without abandoning the story. Feeling a deeper pattern in you, a quiet center, a higher self, and letting it begin to inform your choices. Allowing old protections to soften so that love, creativity, and real vulnerability can flow. Realizing that while you cannot control what happens, you can participate consciously in how you meet it. The shell doesn't dissolve all at once. Layers fall away as you. Stop pretending not to know what you already know. Use the principles you've been shown instead of leaving them as interesting ideas. Choose, repeatedly, to orient toward connection rather than separation, compassion rather than fear. In that sense, Every small act of integrity, every quiet forgiveness, every moment of honest seeing is you stepping more fully into your role as a conscious participant in the simulator, rather than a bewildered passenger. Why this matters. If Earth is a simulator for consciousness development, two things follow. First, your life is not random, but it is not scripted. You are not here to pass a doctrinal exam or to perform a pre-written role. You are here to learn through experience, in relationship with other beings doing the same. The circumstances of your life, body, family, culture, gifts, wounds, are the parameters of this particular run. What you do with them is not predetermined. Second, nothing is wasted. Every joy, every mistake, every loss you've endured becomes part of your higher self's data set. Even the years spent locked in fear or wrong belief are not failures. They are phases in a longer process of breaking through. Seen this way, the question, "Why am I here?" becomes less abstract. You are here to remember, from inside limitation, who and what you really are. Learn how to move as love in conditions that make that difficult. Help, in so doing, to shift the collective fields and egregores that shape this world, so that future runs are less terror-driven and more creative. In the next chapter, we'll look more closely at those fields. How individual and collective beliefs cohere into worlds within the world, and how recognizing them is part of claiming your role as a co-author of the reality you inhabit. Chapter 3. Fields, Beliefs, and Egregores. If Chapter 1 described what we are in essence, and Chapter 2 described why we enter a dense world like this, the next piece is to see what we've walked into. Because we did not arrive on an empty stage, we were born into a family system with its own emotional climate, a culture with its own stories about God, death, and worth, a planet saturated with the accumulated thought and feeling of billions of beings. Together, these form the fields we live in, unseen but very real, shaping what feels possible, obvious, or forbidden long before we make conscious choices. From thoughts to fields. Start at the smallest scale. Every thought you think and emotion you feel is a tiny pattern of consciousness. Most dissolve quickly, but those you repeat gain weight. A single anxious thought now and then is a ripple. Chronic worry becomes a personal field that colors how you interpret everything. A one-time resentment hurts. A lifetime of nursing grudges becomes a capsule of bitterness that can follow you beyond a single life. Explorer teachings emphasize that these patterns can solidify into capsules that hold a soul in a particular state, fearful, self-protective, shut down, until something breaks them. Simulator theory agrees in different language. Your repeated choices and reactions are data that shape the parameters of your next experiences. You can feel this field effect whenever you walk into a room and sense tension or warmth before anyone speaks. Nothing visible has changed, but the field is different. Now scale up. Shared patterns. How egregores form. When many people share similar patterns of thought and feeling over time, their energy doesn't just hang disconnected, it coheres. A family that for generations has believed we are victims will generate a field of powerlessness that new children feel without being told. A community that centers on service and mutual care generates a field of generosity that makes certain kinds of selfishness feel discordant. Nations, movements, and religions generate fields so strong that people will kill or die rather than betray them. Traditions call these large-scale fields egregores, collective thought forms fed by devotion, fear, guilt, and identity. The Explorer sessions show their afterlife equivalents as belief system territories, real environments that souls can inhabit because they match their expectations and agreements. From this perspective, a heaven where only a small in-group sings forever, a hell of endless torment, a gray limbo of sleeping until a trumpet sounds, are not divinely decreed loading zones. They are territories, worlds built and maintained by shared belief and emotional investment. They are real enough to be experienced. They are not ultimate. The Abrahamic egregore, a planet-scale vessel. Nowhere is this clearer than in what we might call the Abrahamic egregore, the combined field generated by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in their institutional forms. At its core, this field holds a genuine sense of one Creator, powerful stories of love, justice, and covenant, the luminous presence of Christ consciousness in and around the figure of Jesus. It has given billions a language for God, a moral compass, and a way to seek meaning. But as explorer-style material points out, over centuries this vessel has also centralized spiritual power in texts and leaders instead of direct experience, weaponized fear of hell, judgment, and exclusion, made human beings the only recognized bearers of soul, cutting off connection to animals, earth, and other intelligences. Enforced ceilings. You may question up to here but no further, or you lose belonging. The result is a planetary-scale gatekeeper, a field that both preserves authentic flame and constrains how far that flame is allowed to burn in most people's awareness. When you're born into a strong expression of this egregore, certain ideas feel obviously true long before you can evaluate them, that there is one life and an eternal, irreversible destiny, that animals, rocks, and planets are spiritually inert. That questioning core doctrines is rebellion against God, not honest seeking. Those feelings of obviousness are not proof. They are the field talking. Belief system territories, here and beyond. It's tempting to relegate this field behavior to over there, to say, yes, there are belief system territories in the afterlife, but here things are fixed. The explorer work and simulator framework both suggest otherwise. On Earth, your upbringing places you in a local belief system territory, evangelical, secular, Hindu, scientific materialist, etc. Each territory has its own protected truths, taboos, and blind spots. Each offers genuine growth at certain stages and becomes constricting at others, after death. Many souls initially find themselves in environments that mirror what they thought would happen: heavens, hells, voids, ancestral lands. These are not final destinations. They are transitional territories that match the soul's field and expectations until it is ready to move on. Helpers, from soul clusters, guides, or more awakened humans, can help locked-in souls realize this is just one layer. You can leave. In both realms, the mechanism is the same. Where you place your belief, attention, and emotional energy helps render the world you experience. This is not victim blaming. It is an invitation to recognize your participation, stepping out without hatred. Once you see egregores, there's a real danger, swinging into contempt. Those people are brainwashed. Institutional religion is pure evil. My family/church/nation holds me back from my true self. I must cut all ties. The explorer material suggests a subtler response. First, see the flame inside the vessel. Wherever love, forgiveness, and real unity are practiced, the source shines through, even if the doctrinal container is rigid. Many people inside strong egregores are genuinely kind, generous, and courageous. Their devotion fuels both the vessel and the flame. Second, refuse to feed fear. You can quietly withdraw your own energy from teachings of eternal torment, divine sadism, or total exclusivity without needing to fight every person who still believes them. You can stop reinforcing images of God that make love and terror indistinguishable. Third, hold the door open. You do this not by arguing doctrine, but by living from a different field, one in which Christ consciousness is inner, not owned, in which other beings and worlds are normalized, in which love replaces fear as the organizing principle. People in your old territory will sense the difference. Some will resist, Some will quietly step toward it when their own capsule cracks. You don't have to destroy the egregore. It will go through its own cycles of life and death. Your task is to stop confusing it with reality. You are not just inside fields, you help shape them. The final shift is this: to realize that you are not only affected by fields, you contribute to them. Every time you choose compassion over contempt, you feed a field where awakening is less adversarial. Interpret a synchronicity as guidance instead of coincidence. You strengthen a worldview in which the unseen is allowed to participate. Live from your own inner Christ nature, quietly, without demanding recognition. You weaken the grip of personality cults and strengthen the pattern of shared divinity. You do not do this alone, but you do it. In simulator language, every choice generates data. In explorer language, every thought and feeling is a pebble in the pool, sending ripples outward. In both, the message is the same. You are not a passive inhabitant of a fixed world. You are a co-author in a layered reality, whose structures are more responsive to consciousness than we were taught. In the next chapter, we'll look more closely at the overlap between the physical and the unseen. How quantum residue, PSI guides, and soul clusters move through the same shared space, and what it means to live aware of that without losing your grounding. Chapter 4. Overlapping Worlds. The unseen at the edges of the stable. By now we have 3 pieces on the table. You are a fractal of source, a localized expression of the same consciousness that birthed everything. You are fused here with a human avatar in a real stable environment designed for growth. You live inside fields and egregores, personal and collective patterns of belief and emotion that help render your reality. The next piece is to see how all of this overlaps with what we loosely call the unseen. Guides, soul clusters, psi phenomena, non-human intelligences, and the dreamlike spaces between lives. The key is to stop imagining 2 separate universes, one physical, one spiritual, and instead picture one layered system, deeply stabilized where it has been rendered for billions of years, still fluid at its edges and seams, a stabilized quantum room in a larger house. Simulator theory frames Earth as a highly stabilized quantum regime, a system where endless observation and interaction have collapsed probability into reliable patterns. Gravity is predictable. Chemistry works. If you drop a rock, it falls. Explorer material agrees that Earth is a physical level of consciousness, in touch with the energies of the physical forms of the Earth, where the senses dominate and experiences are organized around time, cause, and effect. But both frameworks insist stability does not mean separateness. At its foundation, everything remains quantum, fields of possibility rather than fixed objects. Stability suppresses but does not eliminate quantum behavior. There are always quantum active regions, aspects of reality that haven't fully collapsed into classical predictability. These are the cracks where the unseen leaks through. Think of Earth as a well-lit room inside a much larger house. Most of the time, the lights are bright, the furniture solid, and the walls opaque. But at the seams, thresholds, doorways, windows, and dim corners, you can sometimes glimpse other rooms. In power outages and twilight, you notice shapes and movements that daylight washes out. In certain moods and practices, your own perception changes enough to sense what's always been there. Those seams are what we're talking about: quantum residue and psi. Simulator theory introduces the idea of quantum residue, aspects of reality that never fully collapse into classical behavior, remaining context-sensitive and probabilistic. Many of the things we file under psychic or paranormal live here: remote viewing and non-local perception, telepathy, sudden shared thoughts, knowing who is calling, precognition, meaningful dreams that bleed into waking events, anomalous information access, exact phrases, images, or past life specifics that shouldn't be available through ordinary means. These effects do not happen on command, vary wildly between individuals and moments, often show up at edges, in altered states, deep focus, crisis, or emotional intensity. Classical science dislikes them not because they are impossible, but because they refuse to behave like billiard balls, reliable, repeatable, isolated, indifferent to who is looking. They act more like weather, patterned but sensitive to conditions and observers. Explorer sources normalize this. They say they work in that part of you which is outside of your general awareness, moving among a field of energy that you cannot see, but yet is outside of you and is also part of you, transmitting thought forms that you often experience as your own ideas. They insist that humans are constantly receiving such input, but learned filters, I'm making this up, edit it out. From this angle, PSI is not a violation of physical law. It is what you expect in a fundamentally quantum, consciousness participatory universe that has pockets of softened stability. Guides, soul clusters, and thought form teachers. If the room has seams, what's beyond them? Explorer material and the Gandhi cluster describe a rich ecology. Soul clusters. Groups of consciousness that share pattern and purpose, sometimes appearing as councils, like the Gandhi cluster, that teach, assist, and coordinate. Guides and helpers. Beings who work in the unconscious field around you, offering images, impulses, and dictation to support your growth and interpretation of experiences. Lost but not lost souls. Consciousnesses stuck in time capsules of trauma or belief who can be reached, counseled, and escorted into clearer levels, as in the Patrick rescue. These beings operate in the same layered architecture. They don't have to break into our world. They interface with the same underlying quantum field, but from less stabilized vantage points. To us, they show up most easily where the classical shell is thinnest. In hypnagogic states, OBS, dreams, meditative journeys, retrieval work, and around birth and death. The Gandhi cluster explicitly says their primary work is with that part of you, outside of your general awareness, and that they can give you thought forms that you often might think are your own. They don't always announce themselves because the interface works better when your system doesn't panic. When you quiet the surface mind, drop some judgment, offer sincere intent, show me what I need to know in a way I can use. You are effectively stepping toward the seam and saying, I'm available. The specifics of what steps through will match your fields, beliefs, and current stage of growth. Non-human intelligences. Other players. Same architecture. Simulator theory leaves explicit ET cosmologies open, but it makes one thing clear. If consciousness predates Earth and bodies, there is nothing special about our planet as a sole host. Combine that with explorer hints. Beings who helped build ancient structures like pyramids and Stonehenge via mental cooperation and energy-based technology. Consciousnesses that were here then and are here now, some in human form, others in subtler forms, working beside us. Predictions and partial fulfillments of visible anomalies like the moving statues in Ireland, as gentle shocks to rigid belief systems. A coherent picture emerges. Earth is one simulator among many. Human birth is a routine, but not exclusive, entry route. Other intelligences, planetary, interplanetary, transdimensional, can and do interact with this environment, sometimes through full embodiment, sometimes through more fleeting interfaces. Orbs, apparitions, angels, aliens, inner voices. Our lack of perception does not equal their absence. As simulator theory puts it, absence of perception does not imply absence of activity, given our narrow sensory bandwidth. For your purposes, the key is not to catalog every possible being. It is to see that we are part of a shared ecology of consciousness, all operating in the same layered field, at different degrees of stability and remembering. How the unseen responds to focus and intention. What do we do with all of this? The overlap becomes practical when we realize two things. 1. Focus is a tuning mechanism. You don't instantly manifest cars by thinking about them, but where you consistently place your attention, especially with emotion, affects what layers of the house you are tuned to. Constant fear tunes you to fields and beings that resonate with fear. Sincere curiosity and love tune you to more coherent, helpful sources. Practices like meditation, retrieval work, or contemplative prayer are tuning rituals. They temporarily thin the shell and point your antenna. 2. Intention invites specific participation. The unseen is not a vending machine. It responds most smoothly when you align intent with growth and service. Help me awaken at the pace I can integrate. Show me how to bring more love into this situation. If there is a soul I can help that is near, let me perceive what I need to perceive to assist. Explorer work shows that such intentions are actually used. Guides route you into certain dreams, meetings, and even retrieval missions when the conditions are right. Simulator theory reframes this as consciousness at different scales, interacting through the quantum-active edges of a stabilized environment. You don't need to see lights in the sky or hear voices in your head. The simplest interfaces are shifts in inner knowing, patterns of synchronicity, unexpected courage or compassion, dreams that reteach you something you thought you'd forgotten. The unseen responds not primarily to your words, but to your orientation, staying grounded while the walls get thin. As more people wake up to layered reality, two opposite dangers appear: getting lost in phenomena, chasing visions, miracles, ET sightings, and exotic states as ends in themselves, clamping down harder on materialism or narrow religion, refusing any data that threatens established comfort. The Explorer and Simulator frameworks both suggest a middle path. Treat the physical world as real and important, a true simulator, not an illusion to escape. Treat the unseen as continuous with this world, not separate, all part of one architecture. Let experiences expand your context and deepen your capacity to love, rather than inflate your ego or collapse your worldview. In practice, that looks like doing your taxes and dishes while also paying attention to dreams and subtle prompts. Going to therapy and to meditation, letting both work on different layers of your field. Staying wary of any source, human or non-human, that demands worship, obedience, or your energy in exchange for secret knowledge. You are already overlapping worlds. Every time you sleep, dissociate, daydream, pray, or grieve, you are moving your awareness along the seams. The invitation is not to become an expert in other dimensions. It is to live here with the quiet awareness that you are more than here, that you are rooted in a larger field, surrounded by helpers, watched by other players, and capable of shaping the very realities you will later inhabit. In the next chapter, we'll turn to one of the most heavily colonized realities of all, the figure of Christ, and how Christ consciousness looks when we see it inside this simulator instead of as a weapon of the egregore. Chapter 5. Christ consciousness in the simulator. For many of us, the word Christ is wired directly to childhood images. Stained glass, Sunday sermons, a distant figure on a cross, a second coming somewhere in the future. Those images sit inside a powerful egregore that has used the name Christ to organize devotion and, too often, fear and control. In the framework we're building, we need to distinguish between Christ consciousness, a universal state of being, the highest expression of the source pattern in form. The historical Jesus, a human in whom that state was unusually free and visible. The Christ egregore, the thought form constructed by institutions around the name, story, and symbols. The Explorer material gives us a surprisingly precise vocabulary for this. Christ as the highest expression of the pattern. The Gandhi cluster describes Christ like this. The Christ was the highest level of consciousness that was released in human form, the very highest level of energy and light. This same consciousness exists in all, is in every soul, in all matter. It is that very highest form. In other words, Christ consciousness is not an anomaly. It is the peak mode of the fractal we talked about in Chapter 1, the state in which a localized expression of Source is least obstructed by fear, ego, and forgetting. It is characterized by non-separation, unconditional love, and an understanding of power radically different from Earth's usual hierarchies. From this viewpoint, what made Jesus unique was not that he alone had this nature, but that he was unusually able to live from it consistently in a dense, time-bound simulator. He embodied, in a single lifetime, what most of us only glimpse in flashes. The point of his life, then, was not to show us what we can never be. It was to demonstrate what is latent in us already. Jesus inside the simulator. Seen through the simulator lens, Jesus is a higher self that interfaced with a particular human avatar, born, raised, and embedded in a specific culture, operating in full awareness of his larger identity while fully engaged in the constraints of the Earth environment. Risk, pain, misunderstanding, betrayal, death. Choosing again and again to express power as love, healing, inclusion, truth-telling, rather than domination. The Gandhi cluster emphasizes, the highest form of power is that highest level of love, not physical or social control. Jesus would not accept the Earth interpretation of power, but lived in that highest level of love at all times and was in communion with all souls on all levels. In simulator terms, he played the game at full difficulty with full remembrance, and used that to show the system's deepest rules, that no one is truly separate, that what we do to others, we do to ourselves, that death does not end consciousness, that forgiveness is liberation, not weakness. His physical death, in this view, is not a transaction to satisfy a violent deity. It is the predictable reaction of a fear-bound field to a presence that threatens to free it. Those who were out of tune with themselves lived in a state of threat because of this very high energy, and therefore they killed the physical body of the man called Jesus, which merely released this energy and this knowledge to many others. The crucifixion becomes, symbolically, exactly the pattern we saw in Chapter 2, the system trying to destroy what threatens its shell, and in doing so cracking the shell wider, misinterpretation, and the Christ egregore. Down through history, that released energy, the story, the teachings, the presence, has been interpreted and reinterpreted through many layers of human consciousness. The Explorer teachings are blunt. Man has taken the life of this very high-energy being and has brought him down into their level of consciousness and has interpreted his life on their own level. Institutions are manifestations of concepts, interpretations of the truth, not the truth itself, and each round of interpretation moves the concept further from the original living reality. The result is a powerful Christ egregore. It preserves real flame, stories of radical forgiveness, teachings on inner kingdom, practices of love. It also wraps that flame in doctrines of exclusivity, substitutionary punishment, inherited guilt, and deferred salvation that often lock people into fear and dependency. Within this field, Christ is frequently used as a title to be reserved for one figure only, making divinity something to worship but not embody. A badge of in-group status. We are in Christ. They are not. A lever of control. Obey this church or risk losing Christ and being lost forever. From the higher perspective, this is precisely backwards. Antichrist, the ego using Christ's name. Explorer material offers a startling reframing of Antichrist. Any being or movement that claims to be the Christ and gathers energy, recognition, and worship to itself is operating as Antichrist. Those who appear upon the earth and claim to be the Christ consciousness are at the opposite pole of energy. They are seeking recognition in the wrong ways. The effect is to distract souls from the real journey, knowing their own Christ self within. In this light, the Antichrist is not a single future villain. It is any pattern, personal or institutional, that says, "Look at me instead of looking within," or "Your salvation depends on this external authority rather than your own awakening to love." Cults of personality, manipulative ministries, and rigid systems that claim sole access to Christ while suppressing direct knowing are all acting in that spirit, whether they use Christian language or not. The true Christ consciousness, by contrast, does not seek the recognition to be set aside and put up, to be worshipped and adored, invites each soul to discover that same nature in themselves, points away from egoic elevation and toward shared divinity. Christ consciousness in you. If Christ consciousness exists in every soul, what does it look like in an ordinary life? It does not mean performing miracles on demand, knowing all doctrines, being morally flawless. It looks more like a growing inability to sustain separation, seeing your enemy's pain as real, their humanity as non-negotiable, a shift in what you experience as power, away from control and image toward presence, integrity, and love, that costs you something. A decrease in your need to be recognized as special, right, or chosen. A deepening inner knowing that there are no real levels, that the hierarchies we construct are temporary pedagogical tools, not the structure of reality. The Gandhi cluster goes so far as to say, "You are the Christ consciousness. I am the Christ consciousness." The misunderstanding is that a being would appear in some way of power. In other words, Christ is not coming back as one singular figure to rescue us from our responsibilities. Christ is already here, in each of us, waking up at different rates and degrees. The second coming is a collective unfolding of this state in humanity, not an external intervention that suspends the simulator. Jesus, beyond the egregore. What then do we do with the historical Jesus? We honor him as a human, in whom Christ consciousness was unusually free and visible. A teacher who lived, not just preached, the way. A pattern we can resonate with and draw from, directly, beyond layers of institutional interpretation. Explorer sources say his pure pattern still exists on the earth, accessible to any soul that tunes inward rather than getting lost in second-hand concepts. It is possible for souls to tap into that true nature, but to try to interpret that nature is a means of limiting it. Practically, that means you can relate to Jesus as an elder brother in the simulator, someone who has already navigated the hardest levels and is willing to assist. You do not need to believe that his death satisfied a wrathful deity to receive that assistance. You can let his story function as a map of what the pattern in you is capable of, rather than as a legal mechanism that changes how God feels about you. Seen this way, the central question shifts from, "What do I believe about Christ?" to, "How much am I willing to let this pattern move in me?" Living the way, not arguing it. The final, and perhaps most important point is simple. The Christ came truly to show, to live the truth. The only principle which is important in the earth level is to live those truths which you know within your own being to be important, that which does not bring separation. In simulator language, every choice you make is data. Every act of love or fear shapes your field and contributes to the collective pattern. In Christ language, every act that reduces separation is a step further into that consciousness. Every act that increases separation is a step away. You do not need to call yourself a Christian to live from Christ consciousness. You do not disqualify yourself by having once believed differently. The question the pattern keeps asking is always now. Are you willing to see yourself and others as carriers of the same essence? Are you willing to let love, not fear, be your primary interpretation? Are you willing to release the need to be superior, chosen, or right, in favor of being real and present? If you are, then the mind of Christ is already active in you, whether or not you ever use that phrase. In the next chapter, we'll follow the arc beyond one lifetime, how belief system territories play out after death, how souls like Patrick can be helped to move on, and why, in this architecture, no one is finally lost, even when they spend a long time convinced that they are. Chapter 6: Death, Afterlife, and Changing Schools. For most of human history, religions have treated death as the final sorting. One test, one verdict, one eternal outcome. Heaven or hell. Saved or lost. Awake or annihilated. The framework we're building tells a different story. In a universe where consciousness is primary, where Earth is one simulator among many, and where belief system territories are real but not ultimate, death is not graduation day or trash day. It is a transition between classrooms. What actually happens at death in this model? Strip away the imagery and look at the mechanics. Simulator theory says, consciousness interfaces with the brain. It is not produced by it. When the biological interface fails, the conscious user does not vanish. It decouples. Near-death research, past life memories, and regression data all point toward continuity. Awareness persists beyond biological termination. Explorer sessions give a more experiential view. At the moment of physical death, people feel a lightening. No more pain, an expanded perception, an ability to see the scene from outside. Many are met by familiar presences, guides, or environments that match their expectations. Loved ones, religious figures, landscapes. Those who died suddenly or traumatically may not immediately realize they are dead. They can remain locked into a time capsule of their last moments, repeating the scene until something or someone breaks the loop. The Patrick rescue illustrates this vividly. A sailor dies in a ship explosion and believes he is still clinging to wreckage in a cold sea. He calls for help for 12 hours, that from the other side have lasted far longer. A living human, working with non-physical helpers, speaks to him through a channel's body, helps him notice that his parents, who died long before, are present, and invites him to let go of the log. The moment he recognizes, I must have died, the scene shifts. He feels light, floats above the water, sees his parents, and moves with them into a brighter realm. Two key principles emerge. 1. Death does not change what you are. It changes your vantage point. 2. Your immediate after-death experience is shaped by your beliefs, emotional state, and attachments at the moment of transition, which brings us to belief system territories. Belief system territories. Afterlife classrooms. Just as on Earth we are born into local reality bubbles, religious, secular, cultural, the same pattern continues after death. The explorer's sources describe entire regions structured around shared expectations, heavens that match specific doctrines, gold streets, thrones, choirs, hells, or lower realms, that are more like intensifications of guilt, hatred, or fear than external punishments. Gray, foggy sleep states where souls train to expect waiting until a trumpet simply shut down and wait. These are the afterlife equivalents of egregores. They are sustained by the thought forms and emotions of the souls inhabiting them. They are self-consistent enough to feel like objective places. They are not mandated by source. They are generated by consciousness. The Gandhi cluster notes that souls can be locked into a state where they think they are sleeping and waiting for the trumpet to sound, sometimes for what would be centuries in Earth time. Not because God has ordered them to, but because their belief encapsulated within the soul keeps them there until curiosity or boredom cracks it. In that sense, a fundamentalist evangelical heaven is a real environment, beautiful in some ways, but aligned with a particular belief field. A nihilistic void is a real environment for those who die deeply convinced there is nothing beyond. Ancestral lands are real environments for those whose spiritual frameworks emphasize continuity with family and tribe. All of these are classrooms, not final destinations. No soul is lost. One of the most radical claims across Explorer, Gandhi cluster, and Ra-style teachings is also the most hopeful. There is no such thing as a lost soul in eternity. Souls can be lost to themselves, trapped in fear, shame, or rigid belief. Souls can be lost to certain stories, no longer available to act out a particular doctrine's version of salvation or damnation. But no soul is lost to source. Why? Because every soul carries the full spectrum of potential consciousness, the highest and lowest, in its own pattern. Helpers surround every soul, at all levels, whether they are in the body or out of the body, continually working to bring them out of slower vibrations into higher levels of their own being. Time, as we experience it, does not bind these processes. What feels like thousands of years in a loop is only a second of eternity. The simulator architecture reinforces this. Participation in any specific environment, Earth, another world, a belief territory, is optional in the long run, not punitive. Consciousness returns to physical or non-physical contexts as often as needed to integrate, learn, and grow. Ascension or graduation, choosing to no longer incarnate, is a matter of integration, not passing an external test. Death is not the last chance. It is one of many thresholds, retrievals, helping souls change schools. If souls can get stuck in belief territories and trauma loops, can we help? Explorer work demonstrates that we can. Retrievals are cooperative ventures between helpers in non-physical realms, willing incarnate humans who can enter altered states and act as bridges, souls who at some level are ready to move on. The Patrick session shows the basic pattern. 1. A lost soul speaks through a physical channel, still embedded in their last scene. 2. The incarnate helper meets them where they are, without arguing theology. What is your name? What happened? 3. Gently, they introduce information that the locked-in belief can't easily dismiss. Parents who died long ago, the impossibility of still being alive in that scenario. 4. They invite the soul to look for loved ones or light already surrounding them. 5. Once recognition dawns, non-physical helpers take over, moving the soul into a recuperative level where they can rest, review, and reorient. This work continues beyond a single session. Souls stuck in religious sleep states, fear hells, or self-punishing loops are similarly approached and invited to consider, what if this isn't all there is? From our side, retrieval work can be as simple as praying or intending for confused souls near a tragedy, holding space in meditation for anyone who needs help, and trusting your guides to route assistance, being present at bedsides, offering calm, love, and the suggestion that they can look for light and loved ones when they cross. Every such act is data in the simulator, a strengthening of the field in which moving on is normal rather than terrifying. Reincarnation, returning to the same room. One striking implication of the simulator framework, supported by Stevenson, Newton, and Explorer-compatible research, is that consciousness not only persists, it often returns to this same world. You don't reincarnate into random universes. You come back to this specific environment because it is the simulator whose parameters you've already tuned into. It offers continuity. Karmic patterns, unresolved relationships, and even objects can carry across lives. It is still fertile ground for the kinds of learning and contribution your higher self is interested in. That does not mean every soul is bound here forever, but it does mean you have likely been here many times. The people you feel inexplicably drawn to or repelled by are often companions from other runs. The patterns you are tired of in this life are invitations to finally integrate what earlier versions of you postponed. From the wider perspective, there is no rush, but there is also no point in postponing what you can begin now. Death as a change of class, not an end of school. Putting all this together, we can reframe death. It is not the point at which God locks in an eternal fate, the moment when your tiny, fragile self is judged worthy or unworthy of infinite bliss, the final curve of a one-shot story. It is the decoupling of higher self and human avatar, the entry into an in-between state where belief territories and recuperative zones help you process the last run, the opportunity to choose, at a deeper level than personality, what kinds of experiences you need next. From the standpoint of your higher self, dropping a body is like walking out of a classroom into a hallway. You may sit on the bench for a while and think. Go to a counseling room, what we call life review and healing. Step into another class, another life here, another world, or a non-physical learning environment. Or eventually, leave the building. Nothing in this architecture supports the idea of permanent exclusion. All of it supports the idea of ongoing, purposive, participatory growth. In the next chapter, we'll zoom back out to the planetary level and look at one of the largest classrooms on Earth, the Abrahamic egregore. We'll explore how it functions as a training ground, why it is under strain, and how to walk beyond it without losing the flame it tried, imperfectly, to preserve. Chapter 7. The Abrahamic egregore and the planetary classroom. By now, we've been looking at reality as a layered simulator. Consciousness is primary. Physical worlds are stable learning environments. Beliefs and emotions cohere into fields and egregores. After death, souls enter belief system territories that mirror what they expect until they are ready to move on. With that in place, we can finally name one of the largest structures shaping human experience on this planet. The Abrahamic egregore. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, along with their many offshoots, have, over millennia, accreted into a planetary-scale thought form that functions as both classroom and gatekeeper. This chapter is about seeing that structure clearly, without either demonizing it or confusing it with God. How a planet-scale egregore forms. The ingredients are simple. Powerful original encounters with the infinite. Prophetic visions, mystical experiences, liberating events in history. Stories and teachings to transmit those encounters. Rituals, laws, and institutions to protect and organize the community. Centuries of devotion, fear, guilt, and identity poured into the same symbols and narratives. Over time, the explorer-style description applies. Modern evangelicalism, and by extension much of institutional Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, has become more than a set of beliefs. It is a living thought form, an egregore, sustained by centuries of devotion, fear, guilt, ritual, and identity. At its core were authentic flames, encounters with the infinite, prophetic voices, glimpses of the Logos. But vessels hardened. The flame was surrounded by walls of orthodoxy, hierarchy, and exclusivity. The result is a global-scale vessel. It filters the voice of God for billions. It offers community, morality, and hope. It often charges a price in sovereignty and direct remembrance, what the Abrahamic egregore preserves. It's important to honor what this field has done well. Positive functions include language for the one. It gave humanity a widespread vocabulary for a single infinite creator, moving consciousness beyond tribal gods and local spirits. Ethical frameworks, love of neighbor, justice for the oppressed, the value of mercy. Concrete images of intimacy with the divine. Father, Shepherd, Bridegroom, Spirit. Preservation of Christ-conscious teachings. Inner kingdom, forgiveness, non-violence, union with God. For many, the Abrahamic field has been their first contact with something beyond materialism, a container strong enough to hold them through crises, a path where genuine devotion and service to others have flourished. Ray-style interpretations would say, this egregore has been a training ground for polarity, helping billions choose, within distortion, whether they will orient toward love or control. We do it a disservice if we pretend it has only harmed what it distorts and limits. At the same time, the distortions are massive. At planetary scale, the Abrahamic egregore tends to centralize authority in texts and leaders rather than in direct experience of the Creator, weaponize fear, eternal hell, divine wrath, exclusion of outsiders, sanction human supremacy, treating animals, earth, and other intelligences as spiritually secondary or irrelevant, reward conformity and punish questioning, creating ceilings beyond which seekers cannot go without risking identity and belonging. Co-opt service to others by siphoning even loving actions into group identity. We, the chosen, are doing good. Reinforcing separation instead of dissolving it. Explorer teachings add, churches and religious institutions are manifestations of concepts, interpretations of the truth, not the truth itself. And each round of interpretation moves the concept further from the living reality. The more an institution insists it alone owns the truth, the more it behaves as Antichrist, drawing devotion away from the inner Christ self and toward an external authority. From the simulator angle, this egregore functions as a planetary classroom with very strong walls. Inside, you can learn important lessons about devotion, ethics, community, and even mysticism. The same walls that protect you at early stages can become barriers to further growth. Turbulence. Ahead when the vessel meets the larger house. The Gandhi cluster hints that rigid religious systems will face turmoil when phenomena emerge that do not fit their doctrines. Catholic assumptions about animals having no soul will be challenged. Beliefs that humans are alone in the universe will be shaken by undeniable contact. Phenomena like moving statues in Ireland are early examples, events that can't be explained within a purely materialist frame, yet don't fit neatly into conservative theology either. Simulator theory adds pressure from another side. As evidence accumulates for consciousness surviving death, past life memories, and non-local information access, purely materialist science strains. As governments and scientists take non-human intelligence seriously, closed religious cosmologies that center only Earth and one human species feel smaller. We are living in a time when the walls of the Abrahamic classroom are being pushed from both inside and outside. Many souls are discovering that what once felt like the whole school is just one wing. This is disorienting. For some, it will feel like betrayal or apostasy. For others, like relief. Walking beyond without losing the flame. If you're reading this, you're probably already in transition. You may no longer believe in eternal conscious torment, question exclusivist claims about salvation, sense that God is larger than any one book or religion, still feel a deep connection to Jesus, to prayer, to certain scriptures. The invitation is not to burn the classroom down. It is to graduate from it, carrying forward what was true and leaving behind what no longer serves. Practically, that can look like reframing your story. Instead of, I left the faith, you might say, I stepped beyond one expression of faith into a larger frame. Honoring your past self. Recognize that the doctrines you now question once helped you survive and orient. They were tools appropriate to a stage. Retaining the flame. Keep the practices and symbols that still connect you to love and Christ consciousness, while holding them lightly, no longer as the only way. Explorer and raw-style guidance suggests a simple internal stance. See the flame inside the vessel. Refuse to feed fear and exclusivity. Hold the door open by embodying a field where God/source is larger than the container. You don't have to convince anyone else. Your presence in their world as someone who loves without demanding agreement, honors Christ without needing a monopoly on him, speaks honestly about their experiences without contempt, is itself a crack in the wall. The egregore as temporary scaffolding. Perhaps the most relieving truth here is that even planetary egregores are not eternal. Explorer material is explicit. Every religion is a conglomeration of many thought forms, but the concept is one step from the truth. They are not the truths in and of themselves, but aspects along the pathway to the truth. All thought forms, including churches, go through cycles of life and death. It's only when the death comes that life truly happens. The death of these churches shows that they are not reality. Fractile interpretations echo this. No matter how massive the egregore, all distortions collapse, all vessels crack. The flame is eternal. In simulator terms, the Abrahamic classroom is one curriculum among many in the larger school. It has been extraordinarily influential on this planet's development. It will eventually be restructured, repurposed, or retired as humanity integrates its lessons and moves into a more direct, less fear-driven relationship with Source. You do not need to orchestrate that process. You are invited simply to participate in it consciously. Your role in the planetary classroom. Where does this leave you? You might think of yourself as a student who has outgrown one grade but remembers what it felt like to be in it. A peer tutor, not a superior. Someone who can sit beside those still in the Abrahamic classroom and quietly model that there is more. A bridge between languages, able to speak Christian, secular, and weird without losing your center. In practice, you can translate simulator and explorer concepts into language evangelical or traditional friends can hear. Talking about the Holy Spirit's inner guidance instead of higher self, about the communion of saints instead of soul groups, about testing fruit rather than defending doctrines. You can hold a field in which Christ is experienced as an inner presence and universal pattern, not an exclusive brand. You can live as if no one is finally lost, even when their theology insists otherwise. The Abrahamic egregore has done its job whenever it brings someone to the threshold where love, sovereignty, and direct knowing matter more to them than fear and group identity. If you are standing at that threshold, you are not betraying Christ by stepping over it. You are finally letting Christ consciousness lead you where it has always wanted to go, into a wider, freer, more unified reality. In the next chapter, we'll expand the frame further, looking at non-human intelligence and the wider ecology of consciousness in which Earth's simulator is embedded, and how contact with others fits naturally into everything you've read so far. Chapter 8. Non-human intelligences and the wider ecology. Once you accept that, consciousness is primary and not confined to human brains. Earth is one simulator among many in a quantum universe, and belief-generated fields shape both life and afterlife. It becomes strange to assume we are alone. Simulator theory leaves the door wide open. If consciousness predates Earth and matter, there is no reason to think it only chose to interface with one species on one world. Biological avatars are a proven design. There is nothing unique about our biosphere except its local conditions. Non-human or non-native intelligences can interact with this simulator through alternative non-routine modes without breaking the architecture. Explorer material quietly confirms this, long before UAPs and interdimensional became mainstream words. This chapter is about placing non-human intelligence, ETs, guides, angels, aliens, and stranger things inside the same layered lawful reality we've been mapping, other rooms in the same house. If Earth is a stabilized quantum room in a larger house, it's reasonable to assume other rooms exist with different rule sets, different physics, biologies, timelines. Other families live in those rooms, consciousness interfacing with other kinds of bodies. Some of those families have been around longer, with more experience of how the house works. The simulator paper hints at this when it notes, there might be other physical beings and other physical worlds in the universe that have intelligences in them that came to them the same way that our original native consciousness came into this Earth life experience. Explorer-style sources go further. They describe beings who helped construct ancient sites like pyramids and Stonehenge through mental cooperation and energy-based technology, not as gods, but as more advanced players using different interfaces. They note that some of the same consciousnesses who were here then are here now, sometimes in human form, sometimes not. They point out that many heavenly beings were rebranded or suppressed when monotheistic religions took power, leaving us in a very unenlightened state regarding other life. In other words, the wider ecology has been here all along. Our stories about it have shifted. Modes of participation: bodies, walk-ins, and orbs. Simulator theory distinguishes between routine entry, consciousness interfacing with biology at conception or early development, our standard human incarnation; non-routine participation, intelligences engaging the simulator without full biological embodiment, through partial embodiment, temporary overlays, or purely energetic presence. Explorer material and related research give examples that fit this schema. Fully embodied NHI, beings born into bodies on other worlds, interfacing with their own simulators. These might be the aliens of popular imagination when, or if, they arrive here in visible craft. Walk-ins and overlays. Cases where a non-human or higher aspect joins a human system mid-life, blending fields. Some gods among men in myth may have been such fusions. Disembodied forms, light orbs, plasma-like entities, apparitions. Consciousnesses operating in the quantum active layers around our stabilized reality, visible only under certain conditions. When people see luminous spheres, intelligent lights, or angels on the periphery of normal perception, they may be glimpsing souls between lives, guides or soul cluster members, non-human visitors who are not fully incarnating but interacting with our simulator from adjacent layers. None of this breaks the rules we've outlined. It all happens within one continuous quantum field. What we call physical is just the highly rendered band we're tuned to most of the time. Other bands are just as real. We're simply not equipped to perceive them continuously. Contact as a stress test for egregores. One reason non-human contact is so charged is that it stresses both religious and materialist egregores. For rigid monotheisms, acknowledging other civilizations with their own contacts with Source undermines exclusive truth claims. I have sheep not of this fold becomes less metaphorical and more literal. The image of a god who only relates to one tribe on one planet becomes too small. For strict materialism, intelligent phenomena that behave as though they are both physical and non-physical, craft that violate classical expectations, orbs that respond to consciousness, challenge the idea that mind is a late-stage brain secretion. Psi, NDES, and contact experiences begin to look like different aspects of the same underlying participation. Explorer and Gandhi cluster sources predicted that, as Earth approached certain thresholds, more anomalies would occur in places of high tension, like the moving statue wave in Ireland, forcing people to consider something outside of the known reality of man. Religious systems would suffer great turmoil, as evidence accumulates that their exclusive claims about souls, animals, and other worlds are incomplete. In simulator terms, contact is a curriculum update. It invites us to shift from "we are the only class" to "we are one class in a much larger school." It pressures egregores to either expand or crack. How to relate to others without losing yourself. If humanity is beginning to notice other players in the house, how should we respond? A few orienting points. 1. Assume continuity of law. Non-human intelligence operate under the same fundamental architecture. Consciousness interfacing with environments for growth. They are not omnipotent, omniscient gods. They are older siblings, cousins, or distant relatives. 2. Discern by resonance, not by label. Just as with human teachers, ask, does this presence increase love, clarity, and sovereignty? Or does it feed fear, dependency, and grandiosity? Names: Pleiadian, angelic, council, federation, are far less important than the fruit. 3. Stay rooted in your own higher self. Any being or system, human or non-human, that demands you bypass your own inner knowing is out of alignment with the pattern we've described. The true helpers point you back to your own source connection, not away from it. 4. Remember the point of the simulator. The aim is not to collect exotic contacts. It is to grow in love, integration, and agency. If an encounter, real or imagined, does not serve that, it is likely a distraction. You don't earn extra credit for believing in aliens. You grow by how you relate, to humans, to Earth, to the unseen, to yourself. Earth in the wider network. Finally, it helps to reimagine Earth's place in the larger ecology. Within this framework, Earth is a mid-range simulator, dense and emotionally intense enough to accelerate growth, but not so chaotic as to be unmanageable. Its mixture of forgetfulness, free will, trauma, awakening, technology, and contact makes it unusually interesting to many beings. Some non-human intelligences are here as observers, some as helpers, some as opportunists, some as old players with a stake in the outcome. The gathering that Monroe glimpsed, many watchful presences around Earth, makes sense here. So does the Gandhi cluster's focus on our planet as a key node whose balance affects many others. We are not the center of the universe, but we are at the center of our own story on a world whose current transition matters more widely than we can see. Why this matters now. Bringing non-human intelligences into this book is not about adding sci-fi flavor. It's about completing the picture. If Christ consciousness is universal, not proprietary, then Jesus is one local expression of a pattern that other worlds know by other names. If egregores are temporary scaffolding, then no planet, religion, or species holds a permanent monopoly on truth. If the simulator is developmental, not deceptive, then contact, anomalies, and widening awareness are part of the curriculum, not glitches. You don't need to chase lights in the sky to live well in this framework. You only need to remember you are not alone in any sense of the word. Hold your sovereignty and discernment as you encounter new data. Let the realization of a wider ecology enlarge your compassion, not your fear. In the final chapters, we'll bring the focus back down to the personal, what it means to live as a fractal of source in this simulator, how to work practically with attention and love, and why, in the end, the story this universe tells about every soul is one of reconciliation, not rejection. Chapter 9. Living as a Fractal. Practice. It's one thing to hold a beautiful framework in your mind. It's another to live from it when the bills are due, someone cuts you off in traffic, or a diagnosis lands. If you are a fractal of source, incarnated in a simulator for growth, moving through overlapping fields and egregores, in a universe where no soul is finally lost, then how does that change the way you walk through an ordinary day? This chapter is deliberately practical. It translates the architecture into a few core practices you can actually use. You don't need special gifts. You don't need to leave your life. You only need a willingness to work with 3 things: attention, intention, love. 1. Attention, where you aim your awareness. In a participatory universe, attention is not neutral. Simulator theory says, Every observation contributes to the stabilization of particular patterns. Explorer teachings say, reality is where the focus is. The more you look at something, externally or internally, the more real it becomes for you. Practically, doom scrolling feeds fields of fear and outrage. Replaying grievances reinforces time capsules of resentment. Dwelling on love, beauty, and genuine curiosity strengthens those pathways instead. You don't have to pretend nothing is wrong. You can, however, choose your center of gravity. A simple practice. Once or twice a day, pause and ask, what am I feeding with my attention right now? If it's fear or compulsion, gently shift. Look out the window, feel your body, remember someone you love, recall a moment of grace. This is not denial, it's tuning. Over time, this reshapes your personal field, which in turn alters which layers of the simulator you naturally inhabit. 2. Intention, how you aim your participation. Intention is attention with direction. In this architecture, you are always participating. The question is whether you are doing so unconsciously, driven by inherited scripts and egregores, or consciously in dialogue with your higher self. Explorer and Gandhi cluster material emphasize the importance of desire to know the self as the first step in breaking through the human level of consciousness. The need to use the principles you're given, otherwise, knowledge becomes a blockage rather than a blessing. A practice. Each morning set one simple, sincere intention, such as, let me notice where fear is running the show today. Let me see at least one person with Christ eyes beyond their role. Let me respond once with love where I would normally react. You're not promising perfection, you're giving your higher self a handle, a way to route experiences that match the intention. Later, in quiet, review. Where did that intention seem to show up? How did it change your choices, even slightly? This loop turns your day into data you are conscious of, not just information being harvested by default. 3. Love, the highest form of power. We've seen that. Christ consciousness is the highest expression of the source pattern in form. The highest form of power is not control, but love. The simulator exists to teach us how to move as that love in conditions of risk, scarcity, and misunderstanding. Love here is not sentiment. It is the willingness to recognize yourself in others, the choice to reduce separation rather than increase it, the courage to act for the good of the whole, even when your ego pays a price. Practices can be extremely ordinary. Pausing before a difficult conversation to silently remember, this person is a fractal of source, too. Apologizing when you are wrong, not because you are worthless, but because connection matters more than winning. Extending small kindnesses when you could easily stay in your lane. These micro-acts shift your inner pattern closer to Christ consciousness. They also subtly alter the egregores you live in, weakening fields of contempt and strengthening fields of compassion. 4. Working with triggers as curriculum. In this framework, triggers and tragedies are not random punishments. They are lesson prompts, often clumsy, often painful, but always potentially fruitful. The next time you are strongly triggered, instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Experiment with, what is this showing me about my own capsule? Notice the protective pattern. Is it fear of abandonment, humiliation, powerlessness, being wrong? Ask inwardly, what would my higher self want to practice here? You won't always rise to the occasion, but even one conscious response in 10 begins to change the pattern. Gradually, your relationship to difficulties shifts from proof that I am cursed or abandoned to material I can work with. 5. Engaging the unseen safely. Given the overlapping worlds we described, it's natural to want guidance. The danger is either over-reliance, tell me what to do, or fear, I don't want anything to do with spirits. A simple, balanced stance. Acknowledge that you are already surrounded by helpers and influences, human and non-human. Give clear consent only to those aligned with your highest good and the good of all. Test everything by its fruit. Does a message leave you more loving, grounded, and sovereign, or more frightened, special, and dependent? A basic practice. In quiet, say, out loud or inwardly, I invite guidance from my own highest self and from any beings truly aligned with Source and my growth. Anything not in that alignment, you do not have my permission to engage. Then pay attention over days, dreams, nudges, synchronicities, not grand visions. You are not outsourcing your authority. You are recognizing that you are part of a team and choosing coherent teammates. 6. Staying human. It's easy, when exploring these ideas, to feel pressure to become some luminous, endlessly patient being overnight. That is another trap. In this simulator, being fully human is the point. Feeling grief and joy, making mistakes and repairing, experiencing love and loss in bodies that age and fail. The higher self did not come here to bypass the human. It came to inhabit it more fully, with more awareness and less fear. So, let your practices be gentle and realistic. Allow yourself days of fog and doubt. Use the framework not to shame yourself, but to orient when you're ready. Each life is one chapter in a much longer story. You are not behind. You are exactly where you chose to be, given what you wanted to explore. In the final chapter, we'll look at that longer arc directly. Why, given everything we've covered, the only story the universe ultimately tells about any soul is a story of return. Chapter 10. Ultimate Reconciliation. If you've stayed with this framework to this point, one question sits beneath all the others. In a universe like this, what happens in the end? Not the end of a body or a civilization, but the end of a soul's wandering. Is there any real risk that a being can be lost forever, so damaged, so distorted, or so defiant that it never finds its way home? Everything we've seen so far points in one direction, in a cosmos where consciousness is primary and fractal. Every soul carries both the highest and lowest potentials within its own pattern. No simulator or egregore is ultimate. Helpers surround every soul in every state. Time, as we know it, is a local feature, not an absolute. The only coherent answer is that ultimate reconciliation is not just possible. It is the natural outcome of the system. Not because there is no such thing as harm or confusion, but because nothing in the architecture supports irreversible separation. The long arc of the fractal. From the source side, creation is not a one-off experiment that might fail. It is a self-exploration. The uncreated essence sends out sparks, souls, consciousness nodes, as extensions of itself. Each spark carries the full pattern in seed form, the capacity for love, wisdom, creativity, and also for fear, separation, and distortion. Through countless experiences in countless environments, that seed unfolds, learning by contrast what it is and is not. Mistakes, traumas, and wrong turns are not outside this process. They are part of the data. Simulator theory captures this in sober terms. Every choice generates data. Every experience contributes to growth. Meaning emerges not from permanence, but from formation. Explorer teachings put it more personally. Even our worst distortions are attempts at survival or belonging or meaning that are later seen clearly in review and integrated. From the fractal's perspective, all of it belongs. No trap is final. We've looked at many kinds of traps. Personal time capsules of fear and self-protection. Collective egregores that capture devotion and limit questioning. Afterlife belief territories where souls sleep, punish themselves, or loop in trauma. All of these can hold a soul for what feels like a very long time. None of them can hold a soul forever. The mechanisms that ensure this are built into the system. Inner restlessness. Sooner or later, every soul tires of separation, distortion, and fear, and hungers for direct union again. Helper ecology. At every level, there are beings, guides, soul clusters, humans in retrieval work, whose only service is to offer ways out when a soul is ready. Impermanence of thought forms. Egregores and belief territories are energetic constructs. They go through life cycles and eventually dissolve. They are scaffolding, not structure. Non-linear time. What looks from our side like millions of years in a hell loop is, from the timeless vantage, a finite process inside an infinite context. There is no mechanism by which a soul can become something other than a fractal of source. It can only forget, distort, and delay. Justice without eternal punishment. One of the deepest fears for many raised inside Abrahamic frameworks is that removing eternal hell removes justice. If no one is finally lost, do our choices matter? Within this architecture, justice is not about permanent exclusion. It is about accurate seeing. In the life review, you feel your life from three perspectives: yourself, others, and the larger field. You experience the impact of your actions, good and bad, not as punishment, but as direct understanding. You are asked whether you wish to carry certain patterns forward or release them. Reconciliation does not mean the universe shrugs off harm. Victims and perpetrators are forced into cheap forgiveness. There are no consequences. It means consequences are real, but their purpose is always remedial, never vindictive. Every pattern of harm must be faced, felt, and integrated by the one who enacted it. The end goal is always restoration of wholeness, not eternal division. In other words, justice is a process, not a static verdict. Freedom without eternal risk. Does this mean free will is an illusion? If every soul will eventually return, are our choices pre-written? No. Inside each life, each simulator, and each moment, there is genuine freedom. To love or to harden, to awaken or to sleep, to cooperate or to exploit. These choices shape your experience, your pace of growth, and the experiences of others in very real ways. They also shape how you eventually return, and how much repair is needed along the way. What is not on the table is the possibility of permanent exile. You can take the long way home. You cannot make yourself into something that has no home. The Gandhi cluster captures the balance. Man has inherent in himself the solutions to all problems, but often forgets and locks himself into lower levels. Evolution, help, and inner awakening eventually move him out of those locks. The first pebble must be tossed, but the ripples go on. Your freedom is real. It operates inside an even more real love that will not abandon you to your own worst moment. What reconciliation asks of you now? If you knew, really knew, that ultimate reconciliation is the shape of the story, how might that change your posture? It might. Soften your terror about missing God's will, as if one wrong move could ruin eternity. Relieve some urgency to convince others through fear. Increase your commitment to justice now, precisely because eternal punishment is off the table and harm matters here. Expand your compassion toward those still caught in egregores you've outgrown. They are early or mid-stage versions of the same journey. You might feel less like a test taker and more like a participant in a long, shared experiment in becoming. A mid-level student helping newer ones while learning from older ones. A unique angle on source, exploring what only you can explore. And perhaps most importantly, you might be more willing to look honestly at your own patterns, knowing that you are always held inside something larger than your current state. A final image. Imagine the source as an infinite luminous ocean. Every soul is a wave, distinct, with its own rise and fall, its own journey to shore. Along the way, waves crash into rocks, erode cliffs, carve harbors, and sometimes seem to disappear into storms. From the shore, it can look chaotic. From the perspective of a single wave, it can feel terrifying. From the vantage of the ocean, no water is lost. Every motion is part of its own unfolding. The end of every wave is not annihilation, but a return to stillness, and, eventually, another rise. This book has been an attempt to describe the physics of that ocean and the mechanics of the waves using the best maps we have. Modern science, ancient insight, the Monroe explorers, Gandhi cluster, Ra, simulator theory, and your own hunger for coherence. It is not the last word. It is a frame you can stand inside while you listen to the only voice that ultimately matters, the one in you that already knows. Because beneath all the layers, beyond all the theories, that is who you are. A fractal of source, temporarily in a simulator, always on your way home. The end.